All right, for a short while, I am indeed back in Vancouver. We're going to be out and about once the new year comes around, though, so I'm going to have to pre-record more videos once the weekend comes. But either way, we're going to start catching up on all the pieces of news and information that we had seen over the past few days, because if you've been watching the channel the past little while, you know that I was on a trip. Was out, pre-recorded some stuff, all the videos from the past 3 days were recorded days in advance, so this technically is the first video I'm recording in multiple days, which is very strange because I haven't been talking in front of the microphone in a little bit, so I have to make sure I still know how to do this. Today we are going over some alarming news that have been brought to our attention via the folks over on Twitter. This was published on Hockey News Hub's Twitter account on December 25th, so Christmas gift for everybody going out there. And what Hockey News Hub is going out and talking about is the idea of NHL prospects that are in the KHL. Pretty much Russian top prospects that belong to NHL teams, and their status, or statuses, stati? What's the plural version of status? I'm not too sure. The status of these guys and their NHL eligibility, let's just say. Take a look at the tweet made by Hockey News Hub on December 25th. This is of note to NHL prospects in KHL teams. Shumi Babayev mentioned this via Match TV. "We have an order from the president according to which young players should stay here, in Russia. They've been working on rules to not allow young players to go abroad before a set amount of time." There also is a link to the article wherein this quote was pulled from. It's on matchtv.ru, which, if you're familiar with the Russian news outlet scene, is indeed a pretty prominent journalism platform. They talked about this. It's on the article. Link is in the description if you really want to go ahead and read this. Now, another reply from Hockey News Hub goes out there and says this: 4 to 5 years/season seems to be the norm now for KHL players to stay over there anyway. One exception to this was Columbus Blue Jackets' Dmitri Buchelnikov, who came over to the NHL after only 1 year in the KHL. So, for example, Matvei Michkov will have 5 full seasons before coming over, if he somehow doesn't get out of his contract. Now, this idea is a really intriguing one, and it's one that I think caused more of a panic amongst some teams' fan bases than others, depending on who you asked. Now, when it comes to the idea of the KHL wanting to keep their younger players in the league, not wanting them to go abroad, not wanting them to go to the AHL or the CHL or the NHL, this is something that, if you try to paint it out, it doesn't really seem like that surprising of a move. Like, this is the kind of thing where if you take a look at Russian nationalistic identity, especially within the sport of hockey, because of all the stuff going on with the war and because of Russia not being involved in any international competitions hockey-wise, what avenues exist wherein Russian hockey players will be given a stage to showcase their worth? It's going to be in the localized league, in the KHL. Now, you could say that, oh, well, you're going to get a lot of Russian exposure if you got guys like Matvei Michkov, for example, heading over to North America and dominating the NHL like Connor Bedard is, for example. Because if you wanted to say they're in the same tier, okay, that's your prerogative. You could debate, is that not something that would have the same effect? Would KHL athletes excelling in the KHL and eventually dominating the NHL, would that not be a good look for them? But the problem with that is that when you think about why the KHL even exists in the first place, when you think about the idea that the Russian Super League was trying to make this hockey organization that could rival the NHL, that could be seen as an equal, another opportunity for players to go out there and get money, and entertain some Russian fans in the process, there's a really big nationalistic idea that involves itself when you think about Russian executives wanting their players to stay in their league and not go abroad. This was a big thing like 13 years ago when you had the Evgeny Kuznetsovs of the world, the Tarasenkos, that generation-ish of younger Russian players where there was a legitimate scare as to whether or not these guys would want to come over to the NHL if that was actually a possibility. Because it wasn't 100% guaranteed in that time frame, especially since the KHL was brand new, there was some concern, which is why some guys ended up slipping a little bit further in the drafts than they should have. As the years went on, we recognized that it was somewhat of a moot point because, hey, Kuznetsov and Tarasenko, they went to the NHL. Ilya Samsonov went to the NHL. Nail Yakupov wasn't even playing in Russia when he was drafted. He went to the NHL. And as time went on, there was less of a stigma about Russian players and the complications as to whether or not them leaving Russia would pose any sort of problems. You had guys like Vitaly Kravtsov, for example. That's the guy that comes out of my mind because he was taken 9th overall in the 2018 draft. That was a player straight out of the KHL, and there wasn't really too much concern at all as to whether or not he'd want to come over. All of a sudden, you're starting to see younger Russian players say in their interviews and have this indication that they want to be NHL players. That is the goal. They'll eventually play a few years in Russia, they'll play in the AHL, sometimes they'll be good enough to make it to the NHL, and then they'll go from there. But as the 2010s rolled on, it was more of an idea that said that these younger Russians wanted to play NHL hockey, and that continued into the 2020s. You started to see guys taken in top positions like Ivan Miroshnichenko last year. You had Rodion Amirov, RIP, the other year with Toronto. You had Danila Yurov be a top pick by the Wild the other year. Fyodor Svechkov went to the Predators in 2021. There were certainly a lot more Russian players getting taken in these drafts, and it was a lot less of a concern than it was, let's say, 10 years ago. So now, with Russia themselves making an order, with the president himself saying, hey, KHL athletes, nah, you can't leave. You're sticking around here. It makes things a little bit difficult when you talk about players like, for one, Matvei Michkov, taken by the Philadelphia Flyers in the 7th overall spot. Surrounding him, you had 2 other Russians taken by the Coyotes, Dmitri Simashev and Daniel But. These guys are headlining the 2023 draft class of Russians, and Michkov being the number 1 guy makes things really interesting as to where he's gonna go. Because as we've already discussed, this guy already has a contract in the KHL that goes on till 2026. There was always an extended amount of time he would need to stay in this league. Now, if you take a look at Michkov and you say, all right, well, this guy already played 1 year in the KHL last season, which counts as 1 year. You have the year right now wherein he's playing and he's got 29 games played, 26 points. That's 2 years. And then he signed on till 2026, so that means he'll get the 2025 season and then 2026. That's 2 more years of KHL hockey. If you wanted to say that his small sample size in 21-22 also counts, then that's already 5 seasons worth of time spent in Russia and the KHL systems for Matvei Michkov. Would that not already fulfill some sort of a quota there? Is he susceptible to the same rules as to whether or not other Russian players who had not spent all their time in the KHL would have to go through in terms of making the NHL? We had seen comments made by the Red Wings as well, which is why I wanted to talk about this here. The Red Wings have a guy, Dmitri Buchelnikov. He's been very good in the KHL as a second-round pick by the Wings in 2022. And there were some concerns tossed around by Red Wings fans saying, all right, well, it's kind of worrying as to whether or not he'll be able to come over, but the blank view of this, so the more pessimistic view, is that Buchelnikov is not exactly a high-tier name, so maybe he flies under the Russian radar. Hopefully, Dan Engel goes out there and says, this comment goes a step further than previously, but it has helped in the past that he wasn't on a military contract with one of the main teams, aka the military team, in Russia. Now, just in case you needed the update, Dmitri Buchelnikov is playing for Admiral Vladistovok, which I don't think I pronounced that correctly, and this season he's at 15 points in 29 games played, which is half a point a game for a 20-year-old player in the KHL. Very strong numbers for somebody in this age range. So, let me know your thoughts in the comment section below. If you're a Philadelphia Flyers fan thinking about Matvei Michkov, if you're a Red Wings fan thinking about Buchelnikov, if you're a Coyotes fan thinking about Daniel But or Dmitri Simashev, what are your thoughts on the idea of Russian hockey executives not allowing their players to go to the NHL for a certain amount of time? There's a new order from the president where young players have to stay in the country. How much do you think this is going to affect your development with the players, and do you think this changes your plans long-term with how they fit into your system? Let me know your thoughts in the comment section below if you're an alarmed Wings, Coyotes, Flyers, or any other team wherein they have Russian prospects fan. And let me know your thoughts as to whether or not this concerns you or not. I hope you enjoyed this video, and bye.